If you're watching this video, it's likely that you've been training for a while, you're consistent, you're someone who's ambitious and results driven, but you're finding that your progress has slowed and you feel like you don't really have the structure that you truly want. You feel like you're doing what you know how to do, but your progress isn't really showing for it. So in this video, I'm going to give you some actionable steps to take your training from casual lifting to an elite level strategy that guarantees muscle growth results. If you don't know me, I'm Brittany. I've been lifting since I was about 16 years old and I started taking it more seriously around age 19 or 20, and I've been a fitness coach now for about 5 years. And one of the things that led me here to be a coach was just getting sick and tired of not knowing how to put everything together and not understanding how to put all this information together that I was learning into more of like an applicable system that I could get results from and really know where those results are coming from. And so I ended up getting certified as a personal trainer simply for my own knowledge, only to realize that through all of the research that I had done, I already knew almost everything being taught, which eventually led me to figuring all of this out on my own and helping other women do the same. And so once I got a conclusive strategy that encompassed everything I needed to create results, everything took off. Now, there are so many things that I've learned the hard way through years and years of trial and error, and my goal in this video is to cut that time down instead of you taking 8 years to figure all of this out for yourself. Because if you're here, it's very likely that you have hit this inevitable point that everyone will hit at some point, where your lack of strategy no longer allows for results. You just simply can't get by with this lack of strategy anymore. And the longer that you avoid fixing this, the longer you will be plateaued. So today we're going to be diving into the difference between a level 2 and a level 10 training strategy and my principles that I've developed based off of science and experience. To start off, let's go through what keeps people stuck at level 2. Number 1, no progressive overload strategy. Basically just lifting heavy without tracking or progressing properly. Random exercise selection instead of structured training phases. Not training close enough to failure. Poor recovery and nutrition habits, lack of intent with movement execution, following basic programming with just exercises, sets, and reps, going as hard as you can based off of how you feel that day, basing how good a workout was off of soreness, sweatiness, and how pumped you are, and the biggest one is overdoing volume to make up for the lack of knowledge around what drives muscle growth. Now we're going to go through what level 10 looks like and a strategy to help you implement it. First, before anything, is a mindset shift. You need to start treating the gym and your training like a high performer, not just a regular old gym goer who is just maintaining their physique. This means centering your training around principles that drive the result that you want. Next is having more structure, intent, and periodization in your training. So instead of just lifting based off of feeling, follow a structured program with phased progressions. Third is tracking your numbers. This is something that everybody skips out on because they don't understand the importance of it. If you aren't tracking your numbers, you have no idea if you're actually progressively overloading or not. Progressive overload is a byproduct of muscle and strength development. So if you don't know that you're progressively overloading, you don't know that you're actually doing anything in the gym to build muscle or strength. 4 is execution and standardization. This means moving from just doing the exercises to actually mastering the movement patterns, putting your body in a position to use the target muscle to the best of your ability, and having controlled tempo. And you want to standardize all of these things like your range of motion, your tempo, keeping all of those things the same, set to set, rep to rep, and session to session. Number 5 is intensity. This might be the biggest one that takes you from level 2 to level 10. This means training with intent and learning reps in reserve. Number 6 is recovery and nutrition. Recovery isn't just taking rest days, it's sleep management, it's stress management, and of course proper fueling through your nutrition. But the biggest piece people miss in recovery and fatigue management is fatigue management that comes through proper programming. So the choices that you make in your training program and the amount of volume that you're using and the different intensity techniques all have driving factors in how much fatigue you're building up. And fatigue is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to muscle growth. We actually want to limit fatigue. So you need to be doing that through your programming and outside the gym, making sure that you're recovering optimally. And lastly is tracking and adjusting. If you don't have methods to regularly track your progress, you simply cannot go from a level 2 to a level 10 training strategy. Going to a level 10 means getting super detailed on how you're assessing your training, how you're assessing your results, and what metrics affect the fact that you are or aren't getting results. What doesn't get measured cannot be managed. So you want to make sure that you're regularly tracking your progress and looking at your feedback through biofeedback like stress and sleep, how your body is responding, progress photos, and weigh-in. Now those are mostly just principles, so let's dive into the actual strategy on how to do this. Number 1 is to build a proper training program. So for most people, you should be looking at a 4-day workout split, which is upper lower rest, upper lower rest rest. This allows you to hit everything twice per week while also getting really adequate amounts of recovery for muscle growth to happen. When it comes to choosing your volume, which is the amount of sets per week per muscle group. You want to start on the lower end of what you're able to get results with, because again, that's minimizing fatigue and maximizing the opportunity for muscle growth. Again, more isn't always better. And a lot of the time doing more and more and more actually harms progress, because you are creating way more fatigue that your body cannot recover from, and then you cannot build as much muscle tissue. When it comes to your exercise selection, when you're building this training program, you need to be smart about how many compound movements and how many isolation movements you are putting in each session. Proper exercise selection is really important in limiting fatigue while also making sure that you're covering all of your bases. You also want to make sure that you're integrating training phases, as we spoke about earlier, which are typically going to be about 5 to 6 weeks in length. The reason for this is because it offers a time constraint in whatever goal or progression method you are using for that training phase. And this allows you to have variables within your training program that change week to week. So things like the amount of reps that you're going to be doing, the intensity or RIR that you're using throughout that training phase as well. Second is to have a proper progressive overload strategy so that you can progressively overload with purpose. In order to do this, you need to be making sure that you're tracking your lifts. So that means tracking the weight that you use and the reps that you do each week, because progressive overload happens by adding a rep and or weight each week under the same conditions as the previous session. So when it comes to a proper training program, you're going to have predetermined progressive overload that's already built into your program. For example, if your plan calls for a 6 to 10 rep range throughout the next 5 or 6 weeks, in week 1, you're going to start at 6 reps and you're going to select a weight that maybe hits around 2 to 3 reps in reserve. So you want to make sure that you track what weight you're using at that 6 reps so that next week your goal is to hit 7 reps with that same weight. Or if you're doing a weight progression, that would mean that next week you would do 6 reps again, but with 55 pounds instead of 50 pounds. Step number 3 is to get familiar with your intensity through using reps in reserve. Common struggle for most people is thinking they're at 2 reps in reserve, but they're actually stopping 6+ reps in reserve at the end of a set. So maybe once a training phase, you want to take all of your sets to true failure to see if you've been underestimating your effort. So if you thought you were at 2 RIR, but you push out 5+ more reps, you know that you've been under training. Now with a smart program, this will all be pre-planned into your training program. So for example, at week 1, you might start at 3 reps in reserve, and by week 4 or 5, you'll be taking all of these exercises to failure to see what it really feels like. Now you really want to familiarize yourself with what 2 and 3 reps in reserve feels like, because that's mostly where you're going to be spending a lot of your time training. So typically what that's going to look like is on the concentric, which is the lifting part of the movement, you're going to start feeling a slowdown or a really harsh pushback from the weight around that 3 reps in reserve. However, every exercise is different and every muscle group is different. So with biceps, for example, on a curl, you can grind out quite a few reps before you actually hit failure, and they will look really, really slow. So a slowdown doesn't always mean that you're at 3 reps in reserve, but it's a good gauge to start using. Now, I do want to highlight before we move on to the next step that the training progression method that I just highlighted wouldn't be used for everyone. With clients, this is something that I use to familiarize themselves with the RIR, but later on, we might do something that's more advanced, like a static RIR, where we're testing failure a little bit less frequently, but we are training closer to failure more consistently. Step number 4 is doing form videos and improving execution. What you want to do here is find the improvements that need to be made and then standardize it from there. And you can only do this through videoing yourself, period. And when I say standardize your movements, what I really mean is that everything stays the same session to session, set to set, and rep to rep. The reason this is important is because it allows true progressive overload to happen. If you're always changing how the movement is done, you are changing your conditions, which, as we mentioned, the definition of progressive overload is adding a rep and or weight each week under the same conditions. So you want to be looking at things like tempo. The tempo that I like to use and standardize for everyone is a 3-second eccentric, which is the lowering of the weight, a 1-second pause in the stretch, 0 seconds / an explosive movement for the concentric or the lifting part of the movement, and a 1-second pause at the top. You also want to standardize a full range of motion. So for example, on the bench press, you want to come all the way down to your chest and all the way back up. The reason this is important, again, is because if you cut that range of motion short towards the end of the set, that is not trackable. So let's say last week you stopped a couple inches short of your chest because it was easier and you got 8 reps with 95 pounds. When you go and try and do that next week, you don't know exactly where you stopped in that range of motion, and you might get confused thinking, why can't I do as much weight? It's a little bit harder this week, and now you're not progressively overloading. You also want to make small body positioning tweaks to better target the muscle. There are hundreds and hundreds of tips and tricks for this, so I can't go into the details of that, but hopefully through watching some of my content and learning from me, you can learn about some of those tweaks. So practically what you want to do here is record a set from the same angle every week so that you know, am I keeping things consistent? Where can I work on my range of motion, my tempo, and just keeping your finger on the pulse of your own training. So your tempo, your depth, and your control, the way that you do the movement should be identical. And I promise you it's worth doing because you don't see everything in the mirror when you're working out and looking at yourself. You will see things that you miss and don't think that you're doing when you watch your videos back. And lastly, step number 5 is recovery and nutrition. Now, obviously this video is centered around going from level 2 to level 10 in your training strategy, but truthfully, That simply cannot be done without backing it with proper nutrition. People often say it's 80% nutrition and 20% training. I disagree. It's 100% both. For the sake of this video, we're not going to dive too deep into recovery and nutrition, but please know that you need an in-depth strategy to drive results. So you want to get a nutrition strategy to back the efforts that you're putting into the gym so that your training program can produce the results it's meant to produce. A strategy is not eating more protein or eat healthier. It's a phased out approach that has specificity towards your goals. So if you're going to be training hard, you need to periodize your nutrition just like you do with your training, tracking your calories and macros and aligning those macro and calorie targets with your goals. And on the recovery side, I highly recommend implementing a sleep schedule where you go to sleep at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every morning. It's been shown that this helps the release of hormones, things like growth hormone, which is obviously very important for muscle growth and recovery. So that's going to wrap up this video. I hope this gave you some insight into what the difference is between someone who's just walking in the gym mindlessly and going through the motions and someone who actually has intention and treats their training as a craft. The results that it produces are wildly different, and I really hope that this shines a light on that. I can promise you, if you implement this, your results are going to skyrocket just like they did when you were a newbie in the gym at first a few years ago. If this video was valuable, please leave a comment below, hit subscribe for more videos like this, and we'll see you in the next one.